Good morning, all, or good afternoon, depending on what part of the world you are right now. So the next speaker is Rondi Allan. She's the director of the Sustainability Advisor, Sustainable X from the United Kingdom. Her presentation is entitled The Role of SMEs in Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals Agenda. Rondi Allan is the co-founder and director of Sustainable X, a UK consultancy helping businesses to benefit from being more sustainable. Before founding Sustainable X, Rondi was trained as a Pricewaterhouse chartered accountant and went on to steer international supply chains and manufacturing businesses. Originally from Australia, she has worked extensively on 4 continents and been a board member in 6 countries. She was recently announced as one of the top 100 female entrepreneurs in the UK. With a proven track record of enabling businesses to do well from doing good, Rondi is passionate about accelerating businesses' contributions to achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. A regular contributor at events and to media, including the BBC, she believes businesses can profit from mobilizing and sharing knowledge, expertise, technology, and resources for everyone's benefit. And now give the floor to Rondi Allan.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the introduction. Amazing. So I'd like to share some thinking around SMEs and their involvement and how they can support sustainability advancement. So what I'm going to talk about today is just a few bits: the landscape, the challenges for an SME, policies and initiatives, and the role of diplomacy. So I'll take a few minutes. So just to sort of give you a landscape. So SMEs, its definition varies according to where you are in the world. But as a rule of thumb, it's a firm with over 500 or fewer employees. So just to give you some landscaping, there are over 400 million SMEs in the world. That represents 90% of all the businesses, and they are represent 50% of our employees. Formal SMEs contribute up to 40% of the GDP for emerging nations. They generate 7 out of 10 new jobs. And in some places like Taiwan, they actually represent 80% of the workforce. So one thing is really clear: SMEs have a huge footprint on our global economy. So in terms of their importance in the sustainability world, they play a crucial role in achieving several SDGs, and a few of the key ones that they impact is Goal 1. SMEs are the backbone of many economies and contribute significantly to job creations, which enables poverty reduction. This in turn provides decent work and economic growth, supporting Goal 8. In terms of Goal 12, they use significant resources. They create efficiencies, and they do introduce circular models. And in terms of supporting Goal 9, they are agile. The smaller the company, the quicker they can adapt to change. They're often extremely innovative, and they have a potential to really contribute to this goal. But their importance is definitely not limited to just these few. They do impact many. So as a collective force, these SMEs have a huge footprint. And with this large footprint comes responsibility, but opportunity. They have a significant responsibility in channeling human behaviour. Depending on who they employ and how they treat their employees, they can make collective change. They are the backbone of supporting our workforce in terms of their education and upskilling, and it's extremely important. But we can't also underestimate their impact on carbon footprint. So they not only have a huge reach in terms of workforce, but what they do to the environment is significant. In Europe alone, SMEs contribute to 70% of the polluting emissions. So that's really significant. So if you can capture and improve what SMEs doing, you can improve the whole landscape. The most important thing though, they're also present in other larger supply chains. So that means that the bigger organizations actually need SMEs to operate themselves. So it's important that they're resilient and they're working on positive and really positively impacting not only our economy, but our environment and our labor force. So in terms of the challenges for SMEs, being an SME is really tough. One of the main challenges SMEs have is a lack of finance. And this can make it difficult for SMEs to invest in sustainable technologies and practices. Banks and other financial institutions are reluctant to lend to SMEs due to their size, their lack of collateral, and their perceived higher risk. So therefore, they can't then expand their businesses, invest in new technologies, and take advantage of market opportunities. Many SMEs also lack the resources to invest in new technologies and processes that can help them. And therefore, it limits their competitiveness. But in some countries and locations, even a lack of access to reliable electricity and internet infrastructure causes a major challenge for these businesses, especially if they're operating in bigger supply chains. SMEs face challenges in even getting access to these markets due to lack of visibility, lack of marketing expertise, and limited distribution channels. This can limit what they do and their ability to grow, to generate revenue and grow their business. And by doing good things and growing in a positive way, they're influencing in a positive way, all contributing to these sustainable development goals. And the other real challenge for SMEs is the environmental and climate impacts. Climate events such as droughts, floods, extreme heat, cold can all significantly impact an SME, and it might put them out of business because they aren't resilient and they don't have as much in their bank to continue like a larger business. So it's a really challenging time, but they're an important part of what we do. So how do we know how big this opportunity is with the SMEs, and if at all they're making any progress? It is really difficult. It's difficult for them and it's difficult for us. It's difficult to measure if they're moving the dial on the Sustainable Development Goals, because there's no standardized reporting. Even for the bigger companies, it's difficult. Therefore, the smaller companies are struggling to keep up as well. And geopolitical factors also have a really big impact, especially on SMEs that might cross borders. And a really good example of that is Brexit, which is dear to my heart because we live in the UK. That's really stopped international trade and really challenged some of the SMEs. They just don't have the resource and regulation and knowledge to support their business in that way. In our experience of what we do every day, it's really difficult sometimes to motivate SMEs to embrace the Sustainable Development Goals. They lack awareness and understanding of what that is, what sustainability means, and they're often small and they've got stretched resources. So they really need to be convinced why it's good for their business. They need a business need because they have, most importantly, many competing priorities. So as a really good example of some of these challenges and the progress is that even in the UK, which is highly developed, and we saw from Professor's earlier presentation, UK is doing quite a good job at moving along the Sustainable Development Goals, but only 11% of SMEs have a carbon footprint in the UK. So that's quite low, and we're quite an advanced nation. And there's an indicator that's saying only 10 to 15% of SMEs actually report any sustainability measures. So it's a really immature market and set of examples. So in terms of policies and initiatives to support these SMEs, there's two really broad areas or categories of support. One is finance, which is a carrot and an encouragement. The other is regulation, which is very much a stick. In terms of the carrot, we've been lucky enough to see firsthand how investors are, behavior follows the money. And investors are starting to invest in ESG funds, and that's really great. You see 2/3 of investors are now taking ESG into account. And larger businesses, it's great because larger businesses are now asking questions of their supply chain and encouraging them to be more aligned to the ESG agenda. This gives these SMEs that business need I was talking about, that reason to be more sustainable. Because if they don't comply, they might lose their customers. So that is a really big carrot, and the financing angle is key. But that's kind of below the line because that's big industry sectors that need to shift. And investment and asking the questions is not enough. We also need infrastructure development. We need an opportunity for businesses to have access to reliable internet, public transport for their employees to come to work, which will support their carbon reduction and give them good work and opportunities, renewable energy sources, all these great things that need to come through infrastructure development. On a more micro level, really positive opportunity here is micro loans, innovation grants, and taxation incentives to support businesses to be more sustainable. So there's also some really positive encouragement for the SMEs that we see that we can always do more of. In terms of the stick, the carrot, we are, the regulations, we are seeing more regulations coming. We've got modern slave labour, we've got reporting requirements for businesses, we've got emission standards, plastic taxes, minimum wages in some, but not all regions. So there's real acceleration of reporting as we get closer to our 2030 guidelines and targets. Taxes are being imposed, but these impact larger businesses and often not smaller ones, and are only in some regions. What we see in the smaller side and regulations for small businesses is there's some emission, waste and water use regulations, but we really need these to be simple for SMEs. They don't have the resource to comply with major series of regulations, and they need to be competitive. Public procurement is another key aspect. We see all the government tenders, a lot of government tenders in the UK coming out with requirements for equality, diversity, education, social impact. We see them for carbon reduction plans. And that's one way of really supporting supply chains and SMEs through making sustainability a priority. Diversity, inclusion and education. Regulations requiring these things to be reported and making it important that and there's a lot going on in the UK with the up-leveling agenda and skilling agenda. And then the governments need to enforce some of the rules. They need to be important. They need to enforce the regulations to make it a level playing field for SMEs, because an SME might follow the rules, and if somebody doesn't and there's no enforcement or fines for not playing along, it's not a level playing field for all SMEs. So to conclude, or just to talk about the role of diplomacy, and it is key in terms of joining up all these significant dots. There's two big aspects. There's awareness and facilitation. So in terms of facilitation, these international partnerships and sharing knowledge, access to markets, opening up the doors, like events like today, are really key for SMEs to have access to greater markets. The regulatory environment needs to be established, it needs to be standardized, it needs to be clear, and it has to support SMEs and promote the policies that start driving towards more sustainable behaviour. We need to harness the potential that's out there. There's some great startup businesses and amazing things that female founders are doing, or tech or green tech startup. We need to harness that and support the business. In terms of education, we have to engage all levels. We use diplomacy to include the local communities, local government, and also the private sector to make these things happen. We need to understand the challenges that SMEs have adopting sustainable behaviour, and try and find solutions in that landscape. And a key factor is always education. So the more we understand and the more we know, the more we can shift and start to achieve sustainable development goals together. So I'd like to say thank you very much for inviting me today. It's been my pleasure. I'd love to connect with anybody else. If they want to on LinkedIn, I'm quite active, and I'm open for any questions.
Right. Thank you, Rondi. That is so, massive, very engaging, looking at all the things that you've said concerning SMEs, the opportunities that SMEs bring to SDGs. It's just amazing. And when you think about the fact that they represent 70% of businesses, so they actually make the bigger businesses are much, much smaller, and SMEs represent 70%, and they should be given much more attention in achieving these SDGs. I'm looking at what you mentioned in terms of challenges. You said only 11% have a carbon footprint. Does that refer to only just the companies in the UK, or a global phenomenon?
That's the statistic only for the UK, but it's such a immature space. It's difficult to even really know. But from our working with SMEs in the UK, we know that feels about right. That's the statistic we have, and it's only the UK. And we're expecting that perhaps worldwide it's much less, because it's difficult. It's all about the education, the support, the way to do it, the tools, the financing, the resourcing, all those challenges. So just the UK, I'm afraid. I don't have any global statistics.
That is staggering. That is staggering. We're just going to, it's so interesting, but I'm going to move on to our next speaker.
Let me just say a few words before you move on. Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you, Rondi. That was quite very, very elaborate and to the point in terms of the role of SMEs. This is really key, and I like the way you have, drafted all of that importance in terms of diplomacy and things like that. So it's really key. I've taken note of some of the areas you've said in terms of creating awareness, and that's where, from the International Center, we're actually looking at ways we can, elaborate on this. And I think this is a good partnership, having you today to talk about SMEs and things like that. So just a bit of a more question for you in terms of sustainable leadership and how that can enhance how SMEs can begin to engage in terms of actually taking that lead of employing some of these factors which you've listed, from the partnerships to the engaging all the levels, so whether it's community, local government, and things like that. How do we really harness sustainability in terms of leadership from an SME point of view? I mean, what would be the first 2-3 things as an SME I need to do just to begin to engage when it comes to the SDGs? Yeah.
I think it's important. The first thing is a business needs to understand why they are, what their business need is, that they need that. And I think a couple of key things are happening in the world at the moment, in that people are not choosing not to work for companies that don't have a social purpose or don't do good things. So it could be that you need to show an evidence and be more sustainable, because you need to recruit. So you need to find the business need. It might be that you're in a larger supply chain, or you might be going for government tenders, and to win those government tenders, you need to find, SMEs will only deal with the thing that's a business priority. So you need to turn sustainability. They need to understand it's not just environmental, it's social, it's governance, it's economic, and they need to find the business need. So as soon as you turn that on in these business entrepreneurs' head, they understand and they progress because they're a force for good and they are doers and they do things. So that's really important. But we are on an early adoption curve. So when you get some really great key players starting to build case studies of the success of sustainability for them in terms of their measures, their management, their employees, their gender diversity, their inclusion, their impact on the environment, their circular models they've created, you start then building those leaders and it becomes a competitive advantage for them in business and others want to keep up. So it just drives more and more positive behavior. So I think you've got to get in the head of these business people. They want to win. And by winning, by doing great things, it's just great for everyone. It's a positive force all round. So I'm not sure if that answered the question, but I feel really passionate about this, getting in their heads and being really entrepreneurial, because that's what they are, and maximizing their good.
Yeah, thanks, Rondi. That was quite a very good answer. And I'm sure we'll keep talking in terms of how we engage. So a good one. Thank you so much.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yeah.
Okay. There was a quick question. Patricia, do you think, or Rondi can answer
No, we should
that?
take it. We should take it and
okay.
maybe a minute. And then
quick question for Rondi. Regulations, finance, and competition among the big companies has been a challenge facing SMEs in an emerging markets of underdeveloping countries. How can sustainable development goal in diplomacy unlock these challenges?
That's quite
how can
long
the
one.
SDG, I know, he's talking about regulations, finance, and competition.
Yeah.
And among big companies. So then it makes it difficult for SMEs to be a player in emerging markets.
Yeah, they don't have a level playing field, do they? Because they just don't have the reach. I think diplomacy can open doors. And I think what happens is if you use the diplomatic lens on both the big companies and the small companies, it keeps the partnership alive. And I'll give you an example. If you explain to a big company that it's important that they work locally, it's important that to achieve their sustainable development goals, that they support women in business, that they support small business, then they need to find these small businesses to be part of their, to achieve goal 17, to collaborate with and be part of the community. So it works for both ways. So I think working with the businesses, they will have sustainable development goal criteria, or they should do, but diplomacy can really support those connections because it does all lock together in a really, really lovely, positive way. And that achieves, and it's a business I target for the big companies too, to support community, local, female-led businesses and all those great targets and social enterprises and things. So I think diplomacy has a key role in opening and unlocking and having that discussion.
Yeah, that's really brilliant. That's brilliant.